V'hine beperush ki bedavar asher azadu. Now, in explaining that it's with this that they had criminally intended, that's what happened to them. Amr Zal, our sages said, Ish Pasha Shmuz Kufir Vav Dalet, Shu Daf Gimel Reish Amud Aleph. So this is what it's talking about, that they wanted to drown the boys, so they themselves were drowned. Ki b'davar shezadu. So the Medrash says that this which they wanted to do to them, Cdera Shbishlu, that in the pot they wanted to cook them, Shbishlu, they themselves were cooked. So it's from Lashon Nazid. Ve'achenu b'gemara perkama desota daf yud aleph amud aleph hasham mesayim my mashma the high lishna zadu lishna dekderehu. And there it ends in the Gemara. What's this implication that Zadu is a language of a pot? Dichsiv, that it's written V'yazid Yaakov Nazid, that Yaakov cooked a dish, a stew, a soup. V'shirashim him shnei shirashim, and but in the shirashim from the Radak, there are two shirashim. Zadu lashon mezid, that Zadu is that they had intended. It was intentional. Zod. It's from the shorish of Zalad Vavdal Rashi Sham Kasav Mishmitai Veladavar. And Rashi explains that mezid means that you desire the thing. Radak Michlol Erech Zod Kasav, and the Radak in Michlol he writes Zod Ki Hizidu Aleim, that they were mezid upon them. They intended to do to them. The Rabbeinu Zal, Nishtamshu Harbe Bezeh, and our sages use this language a lot. Bezeh Halashon V'Krao Mezid L'Misha Oseh Hadavar B'Ratzon, and they called Mezid somebody that does something intentionally with will. V'Nyin Nazid Kasfu B'Shorish Nezed Mashi Pirushu Ta'avshil, and the word Nazid, he writes it b'shorish nezed in the shorish of nun zayin daled, not nun vav daled. In its explanation that it's a dish. I know v'yazid Yaakov Nazid, that Yaakov cooked a dish. B'membeis simen daled lamed ches. Bashel Nazid Livnei Hanaviim B'Melachim Beis Siman Daled Lamed Ches, in the story of Elisha Hanavi, where he cooks and does the miracle of cleansing the mushroom stew from poison. Bashel Nazid Livnei Hanaviim, he asks one of the Neviim to cook a stew for the Neviim. V'dargim Yonasan uvashel tafshila, and you should cook a dish. V'chein sham od pasuk lametes mem. So too, it brings the same language in another pasuk. V'agamar v'amedrash rabba chivru mezid lebishul, and the Gemara and the Medrash Rabbah, they connect this idea of mezid to cooking in the language. And the concept is the isa b'meore or oskuf sif lamed beis kdira nikra hamalchus. So the Meorior explains that a pot is the concept of Malchus. Ki abishul nikra zivug tochzoch so sakdera ad kan l'shono, because the union is like the cooking inside of the pot. And this is similar to what it says in the letter Samach, where it says in Meorior, where it says that a seer is also the Malchus. And the meat that's cooked in it, Yesod, that's the masculine concept of the flow. Habasar achai, the living flesh, ad kan l'shono, it's like the member that goes into the feminine aspect. That's the meat in the pot. Ibos Beis, Sifid Gimel Basar Hu Yesod, and similarly, it says about when concerning Basar, that's the Yesod. Shikulo Basar, that it's all flesh, no bone. Ainbo Etzem, the siman called Basar. And the sign for this is all flesh. Like, I guess, Kate's called Basar Balafanai. I guess that hints to the sin of the Mabul, where the Mechable Orchayu, like the Zohar says, that it was a sin in the level of Yesod, Adkan Lashono. Anyways, that's the end of the quote from the Me'ori Or concerning Basar. Vayim bezor chelik beis shuma daf kuf nun vav so von mud beis daf kuf nun zayin mud alef al pasuk yavu kol basar lishtachavos. Look what it says in Zohar Truma about all flesh will bow down. I guess it's a concept of Aliyas HaYesod. B'raya mehemna parshas tzav daf lamud gimel lamud beis gabi b'basar hayorid min hashamayim maskinan. And in Raya Mehemna concerning the meat that descends from heaven. That's what we're talking about. That's a concept of flow from Yesod, from above. Min hashamayim. What does it mean from the heavens? Amuda d'emtza isa. That's the middle pillar, I guess, from the Yesod that descends from Tiferes. And from this it says, a flesh from my flesh, that Adam Harishon says when Chava was taken from him. That he's the concept of Zah in general. And the Malchus that's taken from him is the flesh from my flesh. It's also, I guess, a concept of the union of Yesodos. The Basar Mibsari, if Basar is Yesod, and you have the feminine Yesod as well, I guess. Vain Mash goes be Bichel Usri Legaven Daf Tov Kuf Samech Dalav Visham Daf Kuf Memalef. And look what it says in the Bichel, in the book, about the brachos of Yaakov and so forth. Minu kadei lahavin heitevin yenichud manu ma'umayin nukvin umayin dechurin. Look what it says, where it starts to say, to understand the union of the feminine waters and the masculine waters, the zon of zon nukva. Ad b'shir komasham nispor inyan v'hayu lebasar echad, until the concept of the shir koma, the measurement of the height of creation, there where it talks about they became one flesh. With this you can understand the concept of cooking the meat in the pot. That they should be to one flesh. Look what it says in the Siddur of Imdach, in explaining that you should go after Hashem concerning the root and the concept of that you should cleave to Him. And also what it says in the Siddur during the concept of Rosh Chodesh, where it says, it explains the idea of all flesh should come to bow down to me, in front of me. Similarly, you can understand the idea of that the idea that they will become one flesh. That's the concept of cooking the meat in the pot. And Miori, that the cooking is the union Ha'elyon, the supernal union, the Yesod Dnukva, which is the attribute of Yesod, of the feminine. Or Cdera, that's the pot, Asher ba yivashlu hashefa, in which the flow is cooked. Ad kan lashono, v'nisbor mizeh b'makom achar pasuk ubegefen shalosha sarigim, and this is explained in another place on the verse and in the story of Yosef in the dream of the butler, where he says that on the vine there were 3 strands and so forth, hivshilut ashkelosea novim, and you had the cooked or the ripened produce of the grapes. Gam b'inyan. So I guess this idea of cooking there is somehow connected as well to the flow of the grapes downwards. That's the idea of a ripened fruit, is that it's ready to give its juice. So it's so the bishul, the cooking, then is a concept of flow. Gam be'inyan moshel bas melech, also with this known concept of the allegory of the daughter of the king, of the princess, that smelled the cooking in the pot, and she wanted some, so her servants brought it to her. If so, the idea that in the pot that they cooked, that is this, there's this opposite this. Bishul basar b'sadei treifa. You have the cooking of the meat in the opposing side, which is like the verse, and the meat that's found in the field that was trampled. The concept of basar treif. It's the opposite of this state of nullification, that in order to get the flow you have to be nullified and the receptacle. It's the opposite of the bechinas yavu kol basar li'ishtachavos, of the flesh that bows down, that all flesh will come bow down, kimal derachu basar chamurim b'saram, but rather like the flesh of the donkeys is their flesh. Stubbornness and haughtiness on its own. Find b'medrash rabbe emor parsha kav ches al pasuk v'tizni el b'nei Mitzrayim. Look what it says on the pasuk. And you were promiscuous with the sons of Egypt, Shechinaich, your neighbors, Gidlei Basar, that were big of flesh. Gidlei Basar, Yechezkel Simen Tez Zayin Kavav. And so that means that's similar to the concept of that Gidlei Basar. They were large of flesh, is similar to this idea of Basar Chumurim, the flesh of the donkeys. And the like, look what Rashi says, that the Egyptians were very were very into sexual sins. When they wanted even that the sons should be thrown into the Nile, but all the daughters should be kept alive, to be promiscuous with them. Also, they prevented the supernal union by saying all the sons that are born should be thrown to the Nile, meaning to say that you should not have both a masculine and feminine aspect to unite together. They wanted to prevent the supernal union for their nidrikar union, for the lower opposite union. They wanted to prevent the supernal union of the attribute of yesod and the mass of the masculine and the feminine and holiness. Which is the idea of that the river flows out of Eden. So I guess that river that flows out of Eden is the opposite, is the Nile, and the river is the concept of the flow of Yesod, or Yesod Abba. Ulahamshich zivug di Yesod v'nukva de klipa b'zima v'znos v'shivcha ki sirash, and they wanted instead to draw down the union of Yesod and of the masculine and the feminine of klipa bezima viznus, with promiscuity and forbidden relations, and the like the verse when a maidservant inherits her mistress, that instead of the flow and the union being with the master and her and his wife, it's with the maidservant instead. Or tachas eved kimlo, or on the masculine side, when a slave becomes the king. Zeu mibeis havadim. And that's the idea of mibeis havadim yatzalim loch, that from this house of slaves it came out to be king. And it doesn't necessarily referring to Yitzias Mitzrayim, but to the idea of when the other side rules and becomes stronger. Valkin b'Kadera shbiishlu bashlu. So I mean, it's the idea of mibeis havadim yatzalim loch is not just. I mean, in the Medrash it talks about it as Yosef. He became king from the house of Beis Avadim, but it's also from the idea of Cham, that the kingdom of Mitzrayim, they came out from the Beis Avadim, that they were cursed as of the Vadim. So in this that they plotted, that they wanted to cook, they themselves were cooked. Because the concept of the splitting of the sea, that's the supernal union and holiness, that instead of preventing the union, they themselves were drowned in the concept of the supernal union above, which is the splitting of the sea. That's compared to the cooking in the pot. They were, so to speak, cooked in that pot. And that's why it says that the sea before morning became to its strength, which also hints to the concept of the etano is like the hardening and so forth of the masculine aspect. Perhaps. Yes, that's what he brings. That through this the Egyptians drowned. Eitan Yesod connoted that Eitan is this idea of Yesod. Meaning maskila Eitan, like the concept of maskila Eitan, that the Eitan of the neshama is the maskil, it gives a flow, the creation of thought and ideas from the source of intellect in the mind. Is like this idea of the flow from Yesod of in the koach maskil. With all this, you can understand the idea of the other language of Nazid, which is mazid, to do something intentionally, that you do something with will. Ugorem zivug yisod v'nukva, the klipa, which causes the union of the union of Yesod of the masculine and feminine aspect of klippa al derech nazid habishul b'Kadera, like the cooking of the dish in a pot. And it's also I wonder if it's connected to the Ein Kishoy Elel Das, that Mazid and the Ratzon has to be there in order to enable the union, whether it's in holiness or otherwise. So that uses the language of Zadu. Kitzer, so in short, Razal Chibru Nazid im Zadu. So our sages connected the idea of cooking in a pot with intentional. Nazid shbiishlo b'Kadera, the concept of this dish, which is cooking in a pot, basar chai, which is the raw meat, that she smelled the food in the pot, which is known in the Kavanos of the Arizal and Kriya Shema, that this is connected with Baruch Shem, the pasuk Baruch Shem, because it's the idea of Leah and Rachel, and the union with Yaakov. I guess Yaakov is the one who cooked in the pot because of the Maisa with Esav, that he was the one cooking in the pot. But at any rate, so this is the Chiddush in the Kitzur of that he connects the Kdera with Baruch Shem. And there's this opposite side of this, which is in the pot, which is the meat that's in the field, that's treif. And that's the idea that they had intended their klipadika cooking in the pot. Shbishlu, and in this pot that they cooked, bani-spashlu, they themselves were cooked. And we can awaken to the idea in the cooking in the pot, Baruch Shem, that of the pasuk Baruch Shem, it's called the food that's in the pot. Because the union is called that the eating of the bread, like Yisro says, called to why did you abandon the man? Come in and he'll eat bread. Maybe he'll marry one of you, like Rashi says. That his bread was fat, meaning to say, or rich, meaning to say that the women from Asher were beautiful. And that's the cooking in the pot. And the Magid explains that the flow of the smell of the tziki kedera, comes from keser. That the reach in general is a high idea, a makif from keser. So it's not just the cooking in the pot; it's the smell of it. And here's another chiddush in the Kitzur Pirish of the Magid, of the reach tziki kedera, that it comes from keser. And this is what they wanted to get from the makif. The other side wanted to draw down from the makif. They wanted to draw down from the concept of the shivcha kisirash, that the maid servant should inherit the matron. Zohar Chelik Gimel Parshas Achri Sitra Achra. V'zeu b'kdera shebishlu b'nispashlu, or Samech Tas Aleph. It's in part of the Maamar. At any rate, v'zeu b'kdera shebishlu b'nispashlu, and this is the meaning of in the pot that they cooked, they themselves were cooked. Ki nukva de klipa inyan la'asus kalaya be'alma, because the feminine aspect of the klipa, its object is to do destruction in this world. Zoharish Parshas Miketz Baramaz Sham V'zel Lashono, and this is what it says in Zohar Miketz and then in the Ramaz. V'lo mevoy shesuna es Yisrael zera kodesh. Not only does she hate Israel, the holy seed, the holy children, elagam es banea, but even her own sons. Mevakeshes l'akaras hakol, and she is asking to uproot all, meaning to say, even so to speak, the nations of the world, she doesn't then want to keep. She destroys everything. And to all ends, he is plotting or figuring out. So you could look at this pasuk in the positive sense, that it's referring to Eibishter, that he knows the ends of everything. But it could also be referring to the feminine aspect here. It's referring to all kinds of destruction and extirpation. Therefore, they themselves, because they were plotting destruction, they themselves were destroyed. They themselves were cooked in that. Im Tomar, if we want to say, that they were drowned in the sea of reeds. So for the Kol Dargin, that's Malchus of Atzilus, the end of all the levels, not Keser, which is the Reach of the Tzike Kedera, the Makif that they wanted to get from, or the feminine aspect, the Shifcha, the Nukva, the Klippa, the Kedera. We can say, it says that they descended in the depths like a stone. Mitzulos Yom. And Mitzulos Yom, Mitzulos Yom, and the depths of the sea, Pirush Mikdash Melech, the Mikdash Melech explains in Zohar Emor, Daf Kuf Amid Aleph, so from Aleph B'Shem Ha'Yitzchaim, Ki Zun de Noga de Biyah, Him Nikro Mitzulos, that Zun of Noga, of the Klippas Noga, in Bria Tzirasiya, they're what are called the depths of the sea. For him Azazel, and that's what Azazel is. So I guess like on Yom Kippur, when you send down the Seir Azazel, it's similar to the idea of Tashlich, as is learned in the Kavanas of the Ari and Tashlich. Mitzulos Dunuk for the Kedusha, because they are the depths of the feminine and holiness, Hanekrayam, which is called the sea. Ad Kanashona, that's the end of the quote from the Mikdash Melech in Zohar Emor. It's talking about the holidays in Emor. V'kenkas of Od Sham Daf Kuf Aleph Amud Beis. So he says it on Amud Daf Kuf Aleph Amud Aleph, and also on Amud Beis. It goes about this. V'ayin b'me'ori or mem peiches mitzulos yom nikra nukva d'tohom rabba. So the depths of the sea is the nukva, the feminine of the great depths, which I guess would be in Klippa. Zohar Chelik Gimel Parsha Shlach Daf Kuf Samach Gimel Amud Beis V'ayin Mizeh B'Zohar Chelik Gimel Parsha Zachrei Daf Samach Gimel Sof Amud Beis Al Pasuk V'Tashlich B'Mitzulos Yom Kol Chatosam. Look what it says. You will send down into the Mitzulos of the sea, the depths of the sea, all of their sins. The Nukva de Tehom Rab is a place where it can't get out of. It's a true receptacle, like a black hole that doesn't let it out. Mikdash Melech Sham V'Daf Samach Beis Amud Beis Mitzulos Tzel Movis. And the Mikdash Melech there, it talks about Mitzulos that is from the shorish of the shadow of death. So it's in this concept that the Egyptians were drowned, in the shadow of death, and in the Nukva de Tohom Rabba, where you send down all the sins. Anyways, it's the receptacle of the feminine aspect. And that's why it says, in that which they had plotted to cook them in the feminine aspect, with the concept of the dishes, that which is cooked in the pot.